If last week's plot synopsis was quit while you're ahead, this week's plot synopsis is having more variety isn't always a good thing, but we'll get to that. Hi, hey, hello. If you're new here, my name is Rain. If you're not new here, welcome back. I really appreciate you stopping on by to my little corner of the internet, and we're going to be doing a kind of week of sketches as an MFA student on break, or basically what I did all week while on break and having no work to do. Um, and so if you want to draw along with me, feel free to share it with me, tell me about it in the comments down below. Whatever you feel comfortable doing, I love to see and support the people who support me. With that being said, if you have the time to sit all the way through this video, I would really appreciate getting to share all the finished sketches with you at the end of this video, and I think that's all of the intro YouTubey things, so let's just get into it. So to make a long story short, and I don't think I talked about it in my video, probably a while ago now when I discussed redesigning my OC Loki, but one big influence for them as a character and kind of forging their narrative and how I wanted to blend myth with modern day, because that's how my god characters manifest, is kind of these gods existing within modern society, kind of like if all the religious beliefs and gods, kind of like Records of Ragnarok style way, like they all exist and they all kind of govern their designated things, but on a smaller scale, which I do believe would be more beneficial to kind of having multiple gods of the same thing, just covering different regions, but narratively speaking, that's kind of irrelevant because I don't bring all of the gods ever into my universe, right? But they kind of exist on a general level as gods that commend or work on a smaller component of the population, or very much blend their abilities with gods of similar jurisdictions to govern the wider space. Kind of like they're almost a network of beings to cover each thing rather than covering the entirety of everything ever across the globe. But as an aside, Loki, when I was bringing them into my universe and designing them and thinking about who I want them to be as an individual and how I want them to be, one, incorporated into the story and my universe, but also how I wanted to give them a story that was individualized to my universe and what's happening within it, but also still authentic to something their character would likely experience and struggle with, and something that they, based on myth, would have a hard time coping with, generally speaking, to make their struggle real for them. And all of those things, I did take a lot of inspiration from the Bifrost Incident album by The Mechanisms, and kind of, it felt like something that was authentic to something Loki as a character, both as a Norse myth, but also as an individual in a universe created by someone like me, would experience something with and have to cope with, and that is the dichotomy of having committed horrible sins in the past, or having made mistakes that resulted in terrible consequences, whether intentionally or not, and then having to grapple with that in the future, especially a future where you don't fully remember what you did and what had happened. And so the Bifrost Incident, in short, is like if the Bifrost was a locomotive train about to be consumed by Lovecraftian horrors as an album. Which is a great start to a video. And I actually like the song Loki and Ragnarok 1 and 2 and Losing Track for picking out and defining Loki's narrative. I like it from the actual original album, The Bifrost Incident, and the Death to the Mechanisms, which I believe was a kind of redo album of their best works as they parted as a band. I'm not very familiar with the Mechanisms. Like, as a band, I'm just aware of their music, if that makes sense. Like, I know, like, sometimes there are just artists where you really dive into who they are and what that means for their work. And then there are other artists where you generally just really appreciate their artwork, but you don't really know who they are and how they exist. I hope I hope that makes sense, but like as a band, I'm not sure if the mechanisms ended for any particular reason, if there's a future for them ever, if they moved on to a new band, whatever. I'm not sure what happened there. I kind of like the mystery with the Death of the Mechanisms, or Death to the Mechanisms album, but I like both iterations of those songs because they are a little bit different. But Loki within the narrative, masculine-ish voice to me. It sounds like a masculine voice, but she, her pronouns, basically was killed, and she had her memory erased of kind of what had happened, and she was left with only the blissful memories of her past, and was kind of absolved of the memories of what exactly had happened with the Bifrost, the locomotive train that was now hurtling towards mass destruction, basically. So, all of that aside, I felt like that was a very compelling narrative for a character like Loki. And while the Bifrost Incident does not have a happy ending, and the Bifrost Incident, if you're comfortable listening to the album or interested in weird, kind of musical-esque, but not quite musical music with narrative bits, if you're comfortable with that, I highly recommend listening to it. However, there is no happy ending for anybody in the Bifrost Incident because they are all trapped on a locomotive train hurtling towards some unknown. There is no optimistic end to a narrative like that. However, there are redemption arcs to a sense for Loki. She does, whilst her end is not happy, she does, in a sense, redeem herself to the people whom felt betrayed by her prior to what they perceived as her death, and had ordered her death. And so, all of that aside, I felt like that's a very compelling narrative. One, for a character like Loki from Norse myth, who is supposed to cause Ragnarok, which, to an extent, I guess she does, kind of, in the narrative. To my understanding, she helped to build the train. However, she did not plan for what was happening and what is the Ragnarok of that narrative. It was someone else's fault, and I do highly recommend the album, if not for actual listening pleasure, and like a quality of music that you are personally interested in. I think it's a very, very fun and depressing, but fun retelling of Norse myth, and a very drastically different perspective to what we generally indulge in kind of our modern ways of discussing it, and I find it a very refreshing take, right? I'm not as original to turn the Bifrost into a locomotive, you know what I mean? But I find it very deeply interesting, and I very much appreciate the creativity behind that narrative. However, I just thought that was a very interesting tidbit component of Loki, not the locomotive train. I don't have any locomotives. I can't draw trains. I don't want to ever learn to draw trains. I probably will, but I don't want to, right? However, basically what I'm trying to get to is the concept of memory loss regarding something that is traumatic and destructive is something that I think is such a wonderful but horrible thing to assign to a character that I wanted to explore. And who better than my own original character Loki, who I was redesigning at the time, and I was consuming a lot of content about Loki, except for the Avengers or Marvel. Are the Avengers and Marvel? I don't know. I didn't watch that. I haven't watched that yet. I'm gonna do it one day just because I want to see how the different portrayals of Loki exist, because he is a character that I have and I love very dearly. They are a personal, like, soft spot kind of favorite of mine. Not like favorite, but they are definitely one of the OCs that I cherish the most based on just how they came to be, why I created them originally, and kind of the experience that was my first illustration of them ever, which is a horrible drawing I did. Horrible as in, like, the perspective was absolutely abhorrent. I did a terrible job. But it was one of my first really well furnished character illustrations. It was a set of three. I did my OC Thanatos, Hypnos, and Loki, and I was so proud of them at the time. And so there is a cherishing component to Loki as an OC where they're very near and dear to me compared to some of my more modernly designed OCs. So let's get into kind of Loki as a character and why I decided to approach his narrative a bit and how that ties into the illustration that I am starting right now. Mental health, chronic illness, and things like that are a very important aspect of my characters and the narratives that they go through as my characters, right? Because a lot of my work, whether it is explicitly through my very explicit disability work or kind of passively through my character designs, I try to always ensure that my characters have something that is resembling who I am and how I have lived up to this point. Aspects of my own health that have not really turned out the way that they should have, being chronically ill, or mental health components that are, not so ideal, right? And Loki as a character really is a perfect opportunity to have a character whom experiences some of the symptoms of trauma that I also have. So we'll be talking nothing explicit in terms of my life, but we are going to talk about some trauma related symptoms that can occur. So if you need a moment, skip to the end of this little timestamp section at the bottom of the video. But I will also be going into some of the concepts I have for Loki's narrative regarding, how they got to this point and how we've kind of achieved this for them as a character and somebody who is now kind of dealing with the aftermath of something that has caused them great distress, right? So, for those of you who skipped, I will see you soon. But for those who didn't, here we are. And so, one component of trauma that is kind of innate to my life right now and has been something that I've had a really hard time grappling with and kind of trying to live with is the kind of memory loss component that happens when you undergo something serious that kind of your body is not able to reconcile with, right? And the way that your brain kind of tries to block out the remembering of those things, and that can take away from other aspects of your life as well. You forget the not so bad times that occurred in between those moments when you have undergone a long-term negative experience. And so there's a large component of my life in my early teens and then my early childhood where I have very sparse memories of the people I loved, the people whom I wish I could remember right now, but I will probably never remember the actual experiences I have. Rather, I will just have the fake memories forged from what I was told happened between us, like my grandpa who passed when I was very young. I'm never probably going to remember him authentically, right? I think that all opportunity of having memories of him are lost. That those memories I did have at one point are gone to me because of things that happened directly following and directly prior that sandwiched me having him in my life before he passed away. And so I think that Loki canonically in Norse mythology has a wife. I can't pronounce her name, but it's like Sigyn or Sing. But she is a highly devoted and loving wife who, despite all of Loki's flaws as the god of mischief and chaos and a creature of unbridled magic, that she loved him so wholeheartedly despite everything and was so devoted to him. Like the Norse story in which he, to avoid him starting Ragnarok, is tied and punished, long story short, is tied to a rock, slowly having poison dripped on his face that is so painful and that it causes the whole earth to shake when he shudders from the pain, right? And so she sits at his side in a mountain, holding a bowl to catch the poison, and only rest for the brief moment it takes to dump out the poison, to which the earth shakes because it's falling on him instead. And she goes back to holding it and staying with him, despite it being his punishment, not hers. She is devoted to being by his side throughout the entire thing, the whole experience. And I fathom that the loss of a lover like that is a deeply, deeply horrendous thing that would result in a loss of memory and a loss of a sense of self, because a lover like that, somebody who is at your side so intensely, someone that you have forged a bond like that with, I fathom it is incredibly difficult to grapple with a loss of somebody, especially when you're a god and you've been together for so long, likely hundreds if not thousands of years you've been together, forging a life forward. But when I think about my narrative and my universe, there's no room for a full Ragnarok. And I don't think that having the threat and the looming thought of a Ragnarok incoming, is intuitive or productive for the narrative I have overall and the universe that exists. However, when you have gods in your world, it isn't right for me personally to then strip away the thing that is so innate to who they are, right? Loki as a god of chaos, mischief, as somebody whom, despite doing their best to do good and help the gods out, is constantly causing and wreaking havoc in some capacity or another, and is supposed to be the bringer of what is basically complete destruction of the whole universe, right? Which is a burden that would be so intense on your shoulders anyway, right? I find the idea that Ragnarok wasn't that extreme. Ragnarok didn't end the entirety of the universe and destroy all the 9 realms. Rather, Ragnarok destroyed Asgard, or an incredibly large portion of Asgard, and Loki is now facing the fact that he doesn't wholly remember what they did to start this Ragnarok, just that those he loved, a lot of them were lost to this destruction that was somehow brought upon by him, by them as an individual. And I fathom that as you grapple with something like that, a wrongdoing that I don't believe for my Loki was intentional. I don't believe that my Loki had set out to destroy a planet or destroy the people that they loved. Rather, I think it was probably the worst mistake a creature can commit that resulted in the destruction of so many people that they loved, right? And so I very much want to create a narrative in which my Loki can redeem themselves and learn to heal and live despite what had happened and what they have done indirectly or directly. And I think the first part of that is learning to grapple and try and cope with the trauma and the associated issues that come with those feelings and those experiences. And so this is a multi-piece illustration that is meant to demonstrate Loki starting to at least start to gather memories of what had happened and what they did to be able to then grapple with the consequences and recover from the experience overall. So let me just pause my recording right here so I can make it very easy timestamp for those who want to return to the video but did not want to listen to that component. So I'll hear you in a briefly distant future me. Welcome back. If anybody decided to skip that previous portion, I didn't get explicit as I mentioned. However, I did want to create an easy break. That aside, we will only be discussing in even less detail from here on out about kind of what the point of this illustration is in terms of narrative, but with all of that being said, Loki has, as a character and as an individual, undergone a very severe and life altering trauma, and they are now grappling effectively with what they do remember and what they know happened or think might have happened as the fragments of memories come back to them as they start to heal and start to move forward with their life, and those kind of restraints hold them back from fully moving forward without properly going through what had happened and trying to heal, because it was something that really messed up their memory. And that is the component I really took from the Bifrost Incident, and as a narrative for a character like Loki, wanted to really go into. And so this is supposed to be kind of one illustration that will be central to multiple others that is supposed to be maybe kind of attractive. I do need to make his forehead shorter. Shorter? Wow. I need to make his forehead shorter. It is a little bit bigger than originally intended. I will fix that at a later date. But this is supposed to be capturing a moment in which Loki is having those memories come back to them so strongly and so intensely that they're kind of having an issue grappling with who they are and processing and functioning on a fundamental level. And so my hope is to have this illustration either central to all of the other ones, kind of like a mind map, this is a center point, or I will have it be something more like a linear storyline. And my goal is so those lines coming out of the left side of his face, right side of the page, will lead into and bleed onto the illustrations that are supposed to be brief, quick flashbacks to life. Life before now, life before Earth, life before what had happened that brought us to this point, right? I'm not entirely certain yet, but I have had a thought that I might physically bind all of these illustrations together by like punching nice holes, or maybe just making a very small hole off to the side and weaving them together with red string, kind of like the red string of fate kind of thing, but kind of associating it with more so him, them, she being fated to have these memories and having to grapple with what their fate had been previously and how it is building up to a new and better life for them now that they can heal and start to move on, which is a really hard thing to discuss and go over when it comes to trauma, but there is a time and a place where you can't let it consume you anymore. And that is a large component of Loki's narrative that I like to explore further, because it's something that happens to many, many people, and grief, at least to an extent, is something that everyone will experience at some point in their life, and there's a point where you need to be able to kind of move forward. And so while his is at an extreme and a severity that is absolutely untouchable to the average human being, and while she is somebody who is going to have to grapple with this for probably a lot longer than a lot of other people, being a god, she is somebody whom, just as much as other people, deserve to be able to move forward and get the proper mental health treatment that they deserve to be able to progress through life and at least find peace within themselves that while what happened is unmistakably and irrevocably going to completely change their life forever and never leave them completely, that they are capable of creating a life for themselves now, and while it won't be the same, they are still worthy and they are capable of redemption and love despite what had happened. Whether they did it intentionally or not, which in my universe they did not do it intentionally, it was a mistake wholeheartedly, but I find that mistakes somehow make it worse than intention, because when you know you're going to do something, you have prepped yourself for what you're about to experience and you have prepared yourself and you're aware, at least if you're a character like Loki who is well thought out. They are cunning and clever and mischievous, but they are a very smart and intelligent individual who is very aware that there are consequences to actions. Loki as a character would not think to do something like this and not realize the consequences could destroy their life, right? And so, because of that, I have found that Loki as a character did not perform Ragnarok on purpose, right? In my universe, this was not an intentional decision that they have made. And because of that, they are grieving it more strongly than if they had, right? This is something they didn't mean to happen, and so the survivor's guilt behind it is so much more severe. And so that previous drawing is supposed to be the central image of Loki kind of gathering and processing the memories more strongly than they had existed before as they come back to them. And now I am working on a kind of little landscape illustration I want to do to capture a serene but depressing scene from the aftermath of what happened, and kind of a scene that would be innate to the primary point of Loki's suffering and Loki's issues as a character that he needs to go through the process of grappling with. And I've been changing Loki's pronouns between he, she, and they this entire time. I should have said it off at the top, but Loki is completely gender fluid, in my opinion. Just because they're a god that is capable of shapeshifting into whatever they want whenever they want, it doesn't really make sense to me that a god like that would have strict pronouns that they follow by, being able to be anything that they want at any given time. I highly doubt that Loki as an individual restrains themselves and holds themselves to this idea of any one gender. And even within Norse mythology, I'm not entirely sure how strict gender roles were regardless, but I probably should have prefaced that he, she, and they are all pronouns that I use for Loki interchangeably. But with that being kind of an aside and an off tangent, I like to think that Asgard is a generally very scenic place with very minimal kind of civilization outside of primary cities. Like, you kind of have your little village kind of thing, and then it's all surrounded by woods with just a little road leading to the next little village kind of thing. And it's otherwise generally a lot of prime real estate for good nature walks. And so this is probably my absolute weakest point artistically, is just straight landscapes. I'm really not good at these. And so that's another part of why I chose this to be a component of the narrative. I want to push myself to capture things that are outside of my wheelhouse and use them to progress my narratives, right? To progress my stories, to tell my stories, right? And so kind of let's step away from the trauma for a little bit and talk about the scene outside of Loki's experience, because I think it'll be easier to kind of articulate it as a scene that I'm trying to capture, as opposed to the broader narrative that I'm trying to get it to shove into, right? Because at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, as long as it's still a good illustration, I'm calling it a win. Overall, this is going to have a lot of layers into the actual kind of background, and I'm thinking about going either actual realistic colors or absolutely balls off the walls, gnarly colors do not exist naturally in this universe, bewilderment type stuff, like hyper pop to the absolute max. And I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to approach it, but we'll discuss why in a moment. Overall, backpack layers are just supposed to give the feelings of kind of some foliage, some dense trees, maybe a little bit of an inclination of a clearing off to the side right top corner-ish, maybe some clear sky over there. And then off to the left, I want it to feel like a little bit more intense of forestry. And basically the weird circle thing under the tree is not well done, and it's not going to be well done until it's rendered. My sketches, when I plan to do something in paint or maybe even a hyperpop style, very rarely actually come out in a realistic component. Is supposed to read as a puddle, but it's going to be crimson, and a not so very attached anymore hand is reaching into it. Now, I'm a huge fan of iconography of hands, very feminine hands being dipped into baths of blood, as a depiction of femme fatale and women empowerment. I find it to just be very fun, a fun way of like exerting some sort of power. I don't really know the whole point behind it. As far as art history is concerned, women dipping their hands into blood while wearing gothic jewelry is just a thing that I find pretty, but I'm not entirely sure why they felt like it was such a power play. But I love paintings like it. It's my jam, right? And I love the femme fatale era of art. I find it really, really fun, especially femme fatale art made by women. I dig it so much. It was a great era in art history, okay? But regardless of that, I want it to read as capable of being a puddle of blood just as much as a puddle of water, with the hand being dipped into it. And I am really, really torn on if I want this to feel like a misty snow setting with blood within the snow, or if I want this to read 50-50 as the turning of the seasons, the autumn foliage on the ground, the red leaves everywhere, being also equally readable as blood and carnage, right? And I'm very torn between that because I think both of them have such a powerful indicator to them. They really read both ways very, very strongly of the potential that comes from them, right? The stark red against a white snow is just something that is so classic in terms of an illustration, but equally so, I think being able to read it either way and having this double as maybe just a spooky Halloween piece in case it goes entirely wrong, despite it being almost December, would also kind of be a saving grace for me in terms of how this reads. And that's also why I'm torn between a more realistic color palette and hyperpop in terms of how I want to actually render and depict the overall color scheme that this is going to be associated with. In the event that I am doing something that is a snow scene, I very much want to stick to realistic colors, at least to the best of my ability, which, as we know, is not strong. I very rarely actually manage to pull off a realistic color palette traditionally. Digitally is the only space my color palettes actually contain a realistic idea of a sense of the reality. Everything traditional seems to end up hyperpop these days. I'm really struggling to get a normal skin color out of me at this point, but we'll talk about that later as well. But if I'm doing the kind of autumn foliage approach, I really want it to be this incredibly disconcerting, visceral kind of fever dream. You know those scenes in like movies or anime where like they're having a flashback to a club experience or something, and it's all of these vibrant, super stark colors like sharp yellows, reds, and blues all against each other with harsh black shadows. I want it to read like that, but a little bit softer. Think like, not a Seb McKinnon. Oh, what is his name? Dominic something. I will pause my recording right here. I will find his name. and I will name the piece that I'm talking about. Okay, so there is no one particular piece that actually totally encapsulates my entire thought process behind it. Most anything by Dominic Meyer is basically Mayer. Dominic Meyer is going to kind of encapsulate what I'm talking about. It has a lot of depth to it, but a lot of that depth is created by just really, really simple color palettes worked gorgeously. Or at least the color palette seems simple at first. Of course, if you break it down, there's a lot of nuances in the colors that are really extreme. But, the primary color that you'll be looking at in a Dominic Meyer piece, Mayer, dang it, is going to be like a red, an orange, and a purple. And then it's all just worked so wonderful. I love Dominic Mayer's use of color. I highly recommend looking at his work. It's beautiful, literally just worship worthy. I love his work, okay? So, like a Dominic Meyer kind of color palette approach, which is very much out of my realm while in my realm, right? Unrealistic colors for things is very much something I'm good at, clearly. Not to an extent that Dominic Meyer is perhaps good at them, but I'm still good at them. I'm very capable of using an unnatural color for something and still making it feel right. And so I want to kind of maybe embrace that and really kind of push the shapes of the piece more than the actual finer details to create this feeling of a kind of chaotic destruction and a disturbance in the mind, kind of like when something's kind of hazy, or perhaps your TV is starting to glitch out and it's just not quite clear. You can't really tell what's happening, but you're starting to grasp it. Like, I want it to feel like that. And that's why I'm so torn between these two color palettes, because I know that the snow and the red would just be so powerful narrative-wise, but also to push the narrative that I'm specifically going for, to have a color palette that is so disorienting and kind of off, but still strongly rely on that stark red color for the pool and perhaps other areas, I think it could also just very much work super well, and maybe also double as a fall scene, which one thing I feel I need to be very clear about with the illustration, it looks very flat right now, and that's just kind of how the sketch is going to go. I am planning to add the foreground to this illustration when I actually render it in the future, because I want it to feel like you're walking in the scene, but because I plan to work with paint specifically, maybe a marker base layer, but because I plan to work with paint, I'm going to be starting at the very back and layering and layering and layering to get to the foreground. And so I want to have everything that my like prime stuff like completely visible, and then add the foreground later in paint, because it's going to be very simple, like one or two flat colors to create a sense of depth, and it's not going to be highly detailed, right? You're going to see the puddle and the hand and that like kind of strip into the back the most clearly, and everything else I'm hoping to give it a sense of feeling blurry and hazy. No matter how stark the contrast is between things, I want it to feel like a haze, and that'll probably occur. I intend to use paint pens mostly, probably, so that'll probably occur by me putting down the fresh layer of paint onto something and then taking my finger against it and smearing it to create a complete blur of it, and that is probably how a lot of the color palette will go. I've never done that before to create any sort of texture in a drawing, like intentionally. I put my hands in everything that I do. I am a horrible artist. I can never start left to right, because I'm right-handed, so you would start left to right, right? I can never start that way, and I never manage to not smear my art. I'm terrible. I make a mess of everything. I'm horrible about it, but I want to do it with intention for once, and so that's something I'm very anxious but excited about doing. Kind of pushing the kind of stereotypical thing I would do on accident, and doing it with a thought and a care behind it is something that I'm very excited and also nervous for. So I'm hoping that it'll overall kind of work out to my benefit and look really, really good. So I am really excited for the future of this illustration in particular, because I know Loki's gonna turn out good, right? I do a lot of character portraits, and even when I fail a character portrait, I can almost always recover it to make it look at least pretty good still. However, landscapes are something that I really do struggle with, and is something that is kind of my Achilles heel artistically. That and backgrounds, but also environments are kind of backgrounds in general, so they kind of go hand in hand. And so I'm really excited to experiment with something that has no character in it again. I haven't done something like this in a long time. Check my video, which, you know what, I'll just put it in the card above, okay? In the card above, there will be my video of trying to teach myself how to paint. I have one final little additional tangent about the Loki piece that I plan to do or have been working on throughout this video, and it's that the third piece I do plan to show Loki's lost lover lying in a bed of wildflowers. Loki's flower, or the set of flowers that I decide are indicative of Loki as a character. I'm going to be deciding it based on like Victorian flower language probably, and so I think it's going to be a very sentimental and sweet piece, and it's going to be very neat. You know, but if I make it neat, it's gonna fall into the cult of the invalid. Oh no, now I have a problem. Wait, I was gonna make it non-graphic and things like that so that it would not be like disconcerting to viewers and it could double as like a pretty lady laying in a bed of flowers, but if but I'm very intentionally drawing it with the knowledge that she's passed away. And then that's kind of cult of the invalidy. Ooh, oh no, I don't condone that. I'll have to grapple with that now that I've had that 2 seconds of extra thought associated with it, because the cult of the invalid is like just ew, right? For those who haven't been here for my Cult of the Invalid talks, it's basically just a group of people back in the Wheel Day Syncophilia, the painting of Ophelia dead in the river. Basically people like fetishizing dead women. Think about tuberculosis back when it was sexy and not, you know, what it should have been, which is a terrifying disease killing people, you know what I mean? And basically the eroticization of like young dead pretty women. I'll have to think that through a little bit. I hope that breath wasn't too loud. But darn. I hate when I ruin my own ideas by having morals. Dang it. That was a joke. But yeah, maybe I'll do something like Is Her Final Moments Alive? I don't know. I wanted it to be a serene and beautiful death despite everything. Darn it. I'm gonna have to think this through and think if it falls into that, if I'm trying to depict, because I don't want to produce gore. I want one of Loki's sole reprieves of the whole thing to be that she died peacefully, and that he doesn't have to harbor the regret and the weight of giving his lover of hundreds if not thousands of years a brutal and terrible death, technically by his own doing. Like, I want her to pass peacefully. I will have to look into Norse burial rituals. I can't say the word Norse with my speech impediment. It just sounds like I'm saying the word North. I will have to look into these burial rituals and see if I could do something that's kind of honoring that, and maybe incorporate Loki's flowers into that and hopefully create something serene but very much an honoring of the dead to kind of evade that risk of it looking like a pretty vulnerable young dead person, which would fall into the cult of the invalid. You know, think Ophelia, tuberculosis again. Young, pretty vulnerable women out in the middle of nowhere with no one to protect them, dead and available for people of questionable morals in old times to let their minds run wild. I hate the cult of the invalid so much. I hate it so much. It grosses me out so much. But I have to think that through now, like on a moral level, so we'll see how that turns out. Regardless, I have a work meeting right now, So I will return to finish this voiceover soon, where I will explain my illustration that is coming up next that is completely different than either of these and of a completely different narrative. So I look forward to completely changing the topic to discuss, yet again, everyone's favorite topic on my channel, because I've said so. My plant zombie OCs. So, future Rain will look forward to sharing that with you very, very soon. When do I ever time anything this nicely on my channel? What a win for me this week. I only had to delete like 10 seconds of footage for these to line up perfectly with my new project that I am going to discuss from this week. And yes, everything is basically in the same space, and yes, I am always wearing the same sweater because it is my lounge sweater and I wear it all week. I do wash it and I do wear things under it, I swear. So but let's get into this completely different trend and this completely different discussion. So, I mean, if you're on YouTube and you enjoy art, which I fathom you do because you sat through 45 minutes of my unhinged ramblings per usual, you might have encountered the trend. I am not trendy and I'm very much out of touch with a lot of the things, but one that has appeared and I am aware of is the, like, what kind of monster would you be trend, and I found it really fun, and I was thinking about it, and I'm not good at doing things on time or doing trends on time, but I was thinking about it the last several weeks or so that I think it's been several weeks. I don't even know. Time and me are not friends right now. We're nearing finals, so I'm not all here. But I was thinking about it and I was like, well, what kind of monster would I be based on everything about me? And then I was like, what kind of dumb question is that? Obviously, I'd be one of my own plant zombies. I made them as a way to communicate my chronic illness with people. Like, of course I'm one of them. So I was thinking about it and I was like, well, regardless of if I actually participate in this trend and make a short about it, which, by the way, I will lose the audio before I ever finish this drawing. It is just how it's going to work out. Might just show off the sketch for fun. Might have to do a self-portrait for the comparison. But, I just thought it was super, super fun to actually, like, intentionally draw myself as one of my plant zombies, which, to an extent, a lot of my art does just look like me. I really do take after myself when it comes to illustrating feminine people, partially because I'm my own reference a lot of the time, so it's really easy for me to just take a picture of myself and then use that as a reference as opposed to going and finding one in the perfect position I want. The only other female that I use for references super, super regularly is Red's references. I love their content. They are a ripped, gorgeous woman, and I love her. So yeah, Red's references is like my next go-to for references. If you recognize a pose, you probably, I was probably referencing Red for a part of the pose or an aspect of it, so, you know, they're just great. And so this is also the point where I was sketching during a time of day where the light was not behaving with me. Then I also ran out of storage on my phone, so I lost like half of this illustration. And then because I was working late at night for the other half of the illustration, it's like quarters, but whatever, thirds maybe. The other third of it, there's a glare over the face of the character because I'm using my desk light, and it's just how this part of the video is going to be, because it's a week of sketching as an MFA student on break, not me being a professional, which I don't think I could ever be at this rate. I mean, look at me, guys. How long have we been here? Over a year, and I still can't do anything professionally correct. It's just how the world's gonna go. But I had the worst time with this pose. So I was trying to do a pose that's pretty indicative of how I stand, and I was making it too wide of the hip. The hips were too wide. But second to that, it was too fluid, which is usually not a problem you have as an artist. You want things less stiff. However, I am a stiff person. I am in a lot of pain all of the time, and I feel like my bones are going to break and completely crumble to dust. If I move even remotely funny, I will just perish, right? Like I'm gone, evaporated into the ethos. I do not exist anymore. Farewell, right? So, I was having a horrible time with the hips downward, and I eventually got to a point where I was just like, I'm gonna not think about it for a minute. I am just going to focus on some other aspects of the drawing. So I went back to the eye, which earlier you saw me sketching eyes. I was referencing my own eyeball to try and get an idea for the colored one. I do not have a Lumi eyeballs, I promise. I was trying to get an idea of my eye shape at different angles to see how I wanted to kind of approach it. I also needed to reference my hair again because my hair is kind of a little funky. It does what it wants. I don't put any product in it and things like that. Additionally, I get my hair cut every couple of months, so it's going through various phases of short and shorter, and it's kind of looking like a mullet again right now with a very poofy front. It's the bane of my existence. But a lot of my plant zombies are early in their stage of becoming a plant zombie, right? They're early on in plants taking over their body, at least in comparison to the long run, the ultimate point of life at some distant, possibly hundreds of years of being this tree druid creature thing that is now a protector and a stewardess of the forest and ecosystems and the natural productions within it, right? And so I was thinking about it, and well, I am young, and plants take a long time to grow. Mushrooms don't. And when I think of it as a frame of reference, or I think of it as a narrative to discuss my chronic illness and other chronic illnesses, I'm far into my chronic illness, right? Like it's a lifelong condition, so maybe not, but I've had it for like at least a minimum of a decade, if not 15 years, just not diagnosed the whole time because I had other diagnoses that were wrong. Long story short, I have had my chronic pain for a minimum of 15 years and possibly even my whole life. It's hard to remember, as I mentioned earlier. Wow, everything is tying together. I have almost an actual consistent narrative for once, guys. Wow, look at me go. I don't remember much of my early years anymore, so I was thinking about it, and I really wanted to do something kind of visceral and attention grabbing, and I also like iconography or imagery of the kind of bones of people. I very much bring a lot of bones and stuff into my work regarding chronic illness, right? So I'm going for a full open chest cavity approach, and it was a very hard decision to figure out where I wanted that chest cavity to end, but I was thinking about it and I was like, well, what if it's like a jumpsuit? You know, like the ones where you can like zip it all the way down to the crotch region? And then I immediately thought of the gorilla scene in that one SpongeBob episode where they have the gorilla suits on, and all of my childhood fears of that episode came to me because it gave me nightmares as a kid, and it made me really, really scared of like people unzipping themselves from their like skin. And I was like, yeah, I can't do that. I literally cannot handle emotionally making it look like I have a zipper skin. That just leads to my internal, like, it just grossed me out. And it's specifically because of that SpongeBob episode. I think I would probably find the concept cool if it didn't immediately come to my mind, right? So, with that aside, I chose to do it towards the belly button region, and I got very impressionistic with the bones. Per usual, I don't really know bone structure as well as I probably should as an artist who likes to show people's bones, but I got pretty loose and casual with the rib cage, the ribs, and things like that, the sternum region. And I really just focused on creating this nice kind of ring of mushrooms to go around the entirety of the body. And I have it splitting across the face so that I can kind of use the skull as kind of like a little pot, like a plant pot. I say that cutely, like it's not kind of gross. which I didn't render super well yet, but I want that to be where a lot of the kind of larger plants are coming out of the head, and kind of this little area that kind of indicates that the less human part of the plant zombie. That sounds so weird when I have somebody who is like flayed open with mushrooms lining their open body, but because it opens up to show you the inside of the human body, and it's at least semi-realistic, as in like it is like real human shaped bones, just not well done. I wanted something that felt more planty and less grotesque, and so I want it to kind of just look like a little soil pit. And that also kind of furthers the narrative that, like, the parasites that are these plants are controlling the brain. And I know I said the glare is bad, but it's really bad. And you cannot see the face, but I promise you get a good look at it later when I do the full glimpse. And this is only like 5 minutes of the recording. I did just want to show off kind of how it progressed a little bit between when I was working and not working. And so the winter months are really hard here in terms of getting good lighting. I have a lot of stuff that blocks my window as well. And so I basically have no natural light in my house after like 2 in the afternoon. And then I also have no overhead lighting in my room that I work in. I have like one yellow desk lamp, then I have a tiny lamp on the other side of the room, so the lighting is just never great at this time of the day. And even though I tried to edit the light down, it just turned everything orange and worse. So I'm super sorry about that. I am going to be way more conscious of it in future videos. I'm trying to figure out a solution for the winter months specifically, and I haven't quite figured it out yet, but I promise I'm like getting there. Like I almost have a light setup that will kind of prevent this from happening in future videos. I just need to workshop it a little bit better. And that's kind of a side tangent. I wanted to do an Aphrodite kind of censorship. Aphrodite from the Hades games. She has her hair like comes in front of her crotch region, and it forms a little heart out of her hair, and it like perfectly censors her. And I wanted to do that with plants, so I have like the vine coming around, and then like the leaves that are sprouting out of it perform a censor bar, and I think it's really cute and fun. But overall, this plant zombie looks nothing like me. I think the torso's too long. I'm a very short person, and if any illustration I make looks like the person's tall, just know it was not on purpose. I don't really plan. Unless I'm sketching a masculine character, they're probably intended to be my height when I'm sketching them, and that's 5 feet tall. So this looks nothing like me. It looks way too tall. It did not work out super well in terms of that. And the body proportions ended up getting really mixed up, which is fine, but it's still inspired by me in terms of the hair and the eye. And then kind of the way I approach the plant consumption is indicative of where I'm at with my chronic illness and how I feel it would be represented within my plant zombies. And then people who are really far into their life, well, with chronic illnesses, you know, that can be a little bit more sensitive and differently perceived. But for people who are elderly, right, I fathom they're almost entirely consumed by plants and very much kind of almost unrecognizable as proper humans, or perhaps the metamorphosis goes that you kind of become all plant. And as the plant consumes you, you get reforged into a humanoid plant person. Like you kind of have to be consumed by the plants to then become like a druid or a nymph-like creature in how you present and the way that that narrative is overall depicted. I'm just not entirely certain about that and how I want to approach that kind of metamorphosis in my art, but it is something that is really important for me to eventually figure out, and I very much do plan on doing that in the future. I'm just not entirely sure yet. But when it came to me, it felt only natural for the body to be kind of giving way to the plants and to be still majority human, like human on the inside, and still have a lot of human components, but a lot further gone than a lot of the other plant people that I have drawn and shown here on my channel, which there are 2 or 3 videos of me drawing my plant zombies, so I can't link multiple things in the card. Oh no. I should make a playlist of my plant zombies and put this in there, even though it's kind of a far along in the video thing. But yeah, that's a little neither here nor there. Ultimately, I think this did a pretty good job of capturing me, just not in proportion and physique necessarily. Coming basically to the conclusion of this video, there's very little else I actually did this week. I did scribble out in a couple of pages on my sketchbook and really ended up filling up the I page, and then the page next to it and page after, I ended up going a lot more wild and did some wild gestures just to loosen up my hands and kind of get things going effectively. I was not feeling super good near the end of the week, and so I just needed to do some little exercises to feel a little bit better, feel a little bit more myself overall, classic art people problems, right? But overall, I feel like this was not the most productive week, but not entirely unproductive either. Of course, it's a break, so I'm less bound to the excessive creation of art compared to, a standard work week where, my MFA professors are expecting me to create at least something new to show every week. So this is 3 new sketches, so I feel pretty okay about it, but I definitely could have done more. Just because art is like my education, if this was not my education, I'd call this a really good week. But with that as an aside, I really appreciate you sitting all the way through to the end of this video. And if you have anything you want to say about the work created, I would love to hear about it down below. I would also really appreciate it if you share my content with people who you think might like it or find interest in my narratives and the stories I talk about or my work. With that being said, like if you like, dislike if you dislike, subscribe if you want to see more of my content, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, wherever you are. And with all of this being said, bye-bye!